We can take you to South Korea now and speak to Professor Robert Kelly, who is a professor of political science at Pusan National University. Thank you very much for joining us. How credible do you think these reports are that Mr. Jang has been dismissed and some of his aides executed?
Reasonably credible. The institution that provided the information, the National Intelligence Service, has come under some criticism of South Korea, has come under some criticism in the last year or so. And so I think its credibility is on the line with major revelations like this. I'd be very surprised if this was incorrect because it would reflect poorly on the agency.
Why do you think he's done it then?
Why has Kim Jong-un removed him?
Yes.
My guess is a sort of factional splits inside the North Korean elite. Kim Jong-un is new, right? He's only been running the country for a few years. As a new leader, he inevitably will face people from the old regime, people who had been important, in this case, under his father. Last summer, for example, the chief of the army was removed and replaced by someone a little bit more loyal. The vice chairman of the National Defense Commission, Mr. Jang, was also a fairly important figure, particularly in the old regime. He was sort of the tutor of Kim Jong-un, so it's not surprising that Kim Jong-un might be outgrowing this man and then decided he was sort of too much of a threat, represented too much power, clustered from the old regime and pushed him aside.
Have these kind of brutal purges happened before?
Sure, North Korea has a sort of history of doing this. I mean, communist systems in general, Stalinist systems in general, have a sort of tradition of doing this, right? I mean, there are no elections, so it's very hard to know who's up and who's down, and sort of purges and removals, and suddenly people become very sick, right? That's a sort of classic in communist systems, health reasons. Those kinds of things are actually pretty common. And again, the current Kim's father did this as well in the 1990s when he was consolidating power.
How much do you think this changes our perception of what's going on there? I mean, does it in a way strengthen the position of Kim Jong-un, the fact that he is establishing his power in this way?
Yeah, it does. It does. In fact, I think there are a lot of Korean observers, sort of Korea watchers, certainly myself, who are actually surprised that Kim Jong-un has held on this long and has done such a good job of marginalizing these figures, if in fact that's what's happened. I mean, Kim Jong-un's reputation is sort of somewhat of a dilettante, right? I mean, he's sort of very overweight, and he had Dennis Rodman come to see him. He has this sort of reputation as like a playboy, and that's not really what we expect from the leadership of North Korea, and it would not surprise me if others in the North Korean elite thought that it was just some young boy. Remember, he's only 30, and he didn't actually spend much time in North Korea. So despite all of these things, he's actually seems to be doing a pretty good job sort of consolidating and sort of taking over the regime, which I don't think people thought was possible maybe 2 years ago.
If these reports are true and Mr. Jang has been dismissed, how do you think this news will go down in Beijing? Because he was the man who led the last sort of delegation to China. He's a man they know.
Yeah, this is actually a good point. North Korea's economy has sort of been in terrible decline for about 15 years or so. In the last few years, things have kind of perked up a little bit. But one of the big reasons why North Korea has contracted so badly is that the military plays such a large role. This policy, called the military first policy, was introduced under the current Kim's father, right? And many people think that the current Kim Jong-un, is trying to roll back the military to sort of get it out of the economy, right? Because as the military has controlled the North Korean economy, it's become poorer and poorer. It's become more and more dependent on China, right? And so the Chinese actually kind of like that, right? North Korea is becoming like a Chinese economic colony. So this might also be a way of sort of pushing back on the Chinese to say, hey, we're still independent politically, even if we're dependent economically.
All right, it's fascinating. Professor Robert Kelly, thank you very much for joining us from Pusan.